Hello, everyone. Welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, November 7th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We got to start with that big time game that's going on down there in Baton Rouge this upcoming weekend. Number 11, Alabama, number 15, LSU, an elimination game. We're going to break that down in the first segment. Then we'll get into a couple of other Week 11 picks, a couple upset alerts that I want you guys to watch out for. Miami going to Georgia Tech, Michigan at Indiana. We'll break down those two because I think they could get a little bit sketchy for those undefeated teams. Then we'll get into the top 10 teams in the country, break down what I'm expecting to see from them this upcoming weekend, and if we don't see these things, how dangerous it could be for them down the stretch of this season. Then we'll get to the top 25 teams, just bounce around, do all of those games, give you guys an idea of what they're up against this upcoming weekend, including Missouri being home underdogs against Oklahoma. Very, very interesting. And then we'll get into a couple of questions as we head into this Week 11 because there's quite a bit, including what is the under-the-radar game of the week. There's a ton of games that I think are worth watching that we will break down at the very end. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use the super chat. Use at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, little $sign click that at any question, comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be interactive, so utilize that whenever you can. Also, gsmcpodcast.net up there and does the exact same thing. So utilize either of those and we can have a fun little back and forth here. But let's go ahead and jump into this one because this one's going to be special. It's going to be very, very different than a lot of the games that we've seen between these two opponents because we've seen great games. Alabama-LSU is one of the classic games that we see pretty much every single year in college football. This one's a little bit different. It is an elimination game at night in Death Valley. We used to, have these games be massive and be quote-unquote elimination games, but we didn't just outright know it, and it feels like we know it going into this one. We are going to know exactly where these teams stand walking out of it, and frankly, I think it has a lot to do with these two coaches. I think there's a lot on these coaches as they walk into this game because you have Brian Kelly, who has done a great job in his 2 years. It feels like they've been a little bit stagnant the last year and this year starting. So if they were to lose this game, they're heading towards another 9-3 season. Feel like they left a little bit on the table again. Now, obviously, the defense is getting better, and they should be better in 2025. But at the end of the day, would make LSU fans wait just a little bit longer to get where they want to. For Alabama, still uncharted territory. If they were to lose again, they would get to 3 losses for, I believe, the first time since 2010, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 2012 maybe, which would be absolutely insane and definitely something that you would see a very, very interesting fallout from that. So neither of them need this win, quote unquote. Neither of them getting fired on Monday by any means, but definitely is something where it could get the slightest bit sketchy and definitely be just an uphill battle, I suppose, with the fan base after that. So it's going to be an interesting battle back and forth, and I think on the Alabama side, they were able to find their footing. After that tough loss to Tennessee, they were able to dominate Missouri, and the question is that game indicative of what we're going to see the rest of the year, or did they catch a Missouri team that was a little bit underhanded, a little bit injured, and not necessarily playing great football, and just kind of take advantage of the situation? For LSU, they've been stewing on that loss to A&M for about 11 days now. It'll be 14 when they meet up. So definitely itching to get back on the field, I have to imagine. And mainly that defense really wants to get back on the field and show that they have made the progress that it seemed like they were making before that game, before really the second half of that game. But on the LSU side, I think you got to watch Garrett Nussmeier. He has struggled with turnovers recently, and Bama is a team that feels like they're kind of finding their way defensively. They're one of the top teams in the country when it comes to turnover margin per game, almost winning it by 1 per game. So definitely something to watch here. Maybe that's the difference, where it's just Alabama gets 1 more turnover than LSU. They get 1 more possession, and that's enough for Jalen Milroe to pull away. And then the LSU offensive line is another thing to watch here because they've been one of the best in the country when it comes to pass pro. Not many defensive lines have been able to get home at all on Garrett Nussmeier until really a couple weeks ago against A&M, but then you got to open run lanes, and it's not something that they've been very good at throughout the year. It's something that if they don't have Caden Durham in this run game rolling downhill, it's going to be a really long day at the office. They're going to have to rely on Garrett Nussmeier just to outright beat Alabama. He can do that, quote unquote, but definitely is going to be an uphill battle, and definitely one where Alabama will have a lot more at their disposal to kind of counter that. And then on the Alabama defensive side, the big question here is what type of defense are they going to play? Kane Womack has always been kind of we're going to play man coverage, we're going to blitz, be very aggressive in that respect. Problem is, Garrett Nussmeier is incredible against man coverage. He will tear you to pieces if you allow him to stand in man coverage for the entire game. And you have Kyron Lacey, you have Aaron Anderson, you have so many guys on the outside to keep track of that you probably can't just play straight up man coverage if you're Alabama and win this game. So you're going to have to be a little bit more multiple. We'll see what Kane Womack can do. We'll see how he can dial this up. And then on the other side, the LSU's defense really struggled with Marcel Reed's legs. Jalen Milroe might be the very best in the country when it comes to quarterback run game. So the question is, how much do they utilize that? How healthy is Jalen Milroe right about now? And can LSU kind of pin that in and force him to beat him with his arm? Definitely going to be something that you're going to see. And frankly, I think we're getting a little bit of a shootout here. I don't necessarily think it's going to be one of those games where, whoever has the ball last type of situations, but I do think it's going to be back and forth. I do think it's going to be a battle, and it's going to be one where I think LSU is going to want to get that special atmosphere involved really early. I think they're going to take a couple of shots early on in this game, and we're going to see a ton of different players running deep. We're going to see a couple of openings. We're going to see Jalen Milroe get a couple of big plays. It's going to be a little bit up and down in this game, and we'll just see who can make that one extra play at the end of the day. The players to watch for me, I think Jamarian Miller is a really huge player for Alabama, really just down the stretch of the season more than anything else, but particularly in this game. Whit Weeks has played incredible football on the other side for LSU. If you can keep him at bay, if you can keep him just sitting at least flat-footed for 2 seconds, for half a second really, in each play, you're going to be really successful. And Jamarian Miller, with his receiving ability, with his ability to take linebackers out of the backfield or out of their position and make life tough for them, it makes that a lot easier. It felt like in the first half of that Georgia game, he was keeping C.J. Allen. He was keeping Smile Mondon just kind of at bay, and it was opening running lanes for Jalen Milroe. It was opening passing lanes for all of these other players. So I think it's one of those guys that kind of just pull attention away from where LSU wants to put it, which is on Jalen Milroe. And I think those running backs just in general need to keep rolling if you're Alabama. And then on the defensive side, I think Qual Rousseau is a hugely important player in this game. Obviously, you want to get after the passer. That's no two ways about that. Obviously, one of those guys that you badly need to be aggressive in this game and be kind of relentless. The other part of that is I think them dropping back into coverage into zone is going to be a huge part of this game. He was able to make a couple of big plays throughout the season in coverage. I think he is a player that could sit under and maybe make a couple of those special plays. And then obviously his real, attribute is on those pass rushes, being able to get home. If he can get Garrett Nussmeier on the ground a couple of times, then you're probably sitting pretty if you're Alabama in this one. And then we got Caden Durham on the other side, the other running back, because this LSU run game has not been good, plain and simple. It has not been nearly good enough if they're going to be able to compete in this game. And I think when you look at a guy like Caden Durham, he is so dynamic. He can do so many different things out of the backfield that you can open a lot of doors, even if it's not just an outright run game. Even if it's not, inside, outside zone, you can play around with a lot of different things, and this guy can pretty much do all of the things you want to do. And then we got to talk about Whit Weeks, one of the most special players on this LSU defense, probably the guy that has really led the charge in terms of their turnaround on that side of the ball, and he's going to have to play really, really good football on Saturday. We talked about Jamarian Miller, but just in general, this run game in general, keeping Jalen Milroe just kind of under wraps, it's an incredibly hard thing to do, and this is likely going to be the guy that is going to be chasing around a lot of those special playmakers for Alabama on Saturday. But keys to victory for Alabama, I think you got to keep this run game in general just rolling. It was very, very good against Missouri. It's one of those that has been a little bit up and down. The question is that something we're going to see continue, or was it a little bit just catching one team on a very bad day and being able to take advantage of those openings? I think Alabama has the personnel to do it. The question is, can you get Jalen Milroe on the outside? Can you get Justice Haynes and Jamarian Miller the openings they need? And will this LSU defense kind of sit a little bit further back because Jalen Milroe is so dangerous down the field? Will they be a little bit more nervous? And then can you get the run game going? Because frankly, I don't know if you're beating this if it's just Jalen Milroe standing back there and throwing passes all day. And then I think they got to win the time of possession. And frankly, this kind of goes for both teams, but I think particularly Alabama, when you talk about a team on the other side that is going to pass the ball, that is going to spread out your defense, that is going to go quickly, you're going to have to keep your offense on the field just a little bit longer. It goes back to that run game. You're going to have to get that going a little bit and make sure that you get those big plays. Obviously, you want explosives in this game, but you also want to slow it down just a little bit, because I do think whoever wins the time of possession, gives their defense just a little bit more time to reset, is probably going to be the team that you find out on top, and then probably be the team that heads on their way to a possible CFP berth. But then for Alabama, keep everything in front. We talked about it a little bit earlier. They love to play man coverage. Thing is, against these LSU wide receivers and against Garrett Nussmeier, you're not going to win playing man coverage all day. You're just not. It's going to be an absolute nightmare to deal with, and you're going to look up in the third quarter and you're going to be down by 21 points. They got to play back. They got to be able to play, maybe 2 high, 3 high shell, and just keep everything in front of them, tackle really well, and get out there with a win. So it's going to be really interesting to see the approach of Kane Womack, because kind of goes against what he likes to do. Kind of goes against, his aggressive play style, but the reality is, this is going to be the way that you're going to be able to win this game. So I would expect to see a little bit more, sit back and coverage, play a little bit more zone, and then attack when the pass catcher gets the ball. But at the end of the day, it's definitely something that could be a little bit tough of a transition for this defense. For LSU, I think we talked about it briefly. The extended run game is going to be massive. The run game has not been great this year, only 103rd in the country when it comes to yards per game on the ground. So whether it's RPOs or screens or, end arounds or jet sweeps, whatever it looks like, finding a way to get these run lanes open, because the way you can do it is get an end around with Aaron Anderson and then use that end around as a fake and then hand it off to Caden Durham. There's so many different ways to kind of play around with different things, and it's definitely going to be up to Joe Sloan to get this run game going, even if it's a pseudo run game. It doesn't have to be, you're walking out of there with 150 rush yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground. You got to walk out there with something, though. You got to be able to walk out there and find slight openings. It doesn't have to be perfect, and frankly, Alabama can be run on. You're probably not going to get those explosive plays that you like on the ground, but at the end of the day, you can probably plug out 3-4 yards of carry and find a way to keep these drives alive if you can get the push that you need. And it's definitely something that they're going to deal with, especially, it sounds like Garrett Dellinger is not going to go in this game, the guard, so definitely something to watch there. And then limiting mistakes. Garrett Nussmeier has thrown 7 picks in the last 4 games. Cannot happen if you're LSU in this game, because when you walk into an Alabama game just in general, you have a motivated team on the other side, and you have a team on the other side that is going to cause problems for your defense. It might not be all day, it might not be as aggressive as I'm thinking right now, but they're absolutely going to cause issues. You being able to limit mistakes, you being able to keep the ball out of their hands as much as possible and be able to grind out drives is going to be probably the key to this game, and that really just comes down to Garrett Nussmeier and this offensive line giving him time to digest everything. And then finally, you got to eliminate Milroe's legs. This is going to be much easier said than done. This is one of the best running quarterbacks, if not the best running quarterback in the country. So the question is, did LSU struggle with Marcel Reed because they just can't, guard someone, a quarterback that can run like that? Or were they just fully unprepared? That's something that we'll have to figure out kind of along the way in this one. And it could just be that they were ill-prepared, but Jalen Milroe is just too much to deal with. So it's going to be really interesting to watch, and it could just be that Jalen Milroe totally takes over this game with his legs, and he ends up being the reason that they win outright. I'm going to take Alabama. I think that's going to be the reason, frankly, that they win outright. I think Jalen Milroe's legs are going to be a problem. I think Alabama is able to win this one 34-28. I think it gets a little bit up and down at times, gets a little bit stalled out at times. I think it's going to be kind of a back-and-forth game, but at the end of the day, I just can't go against Jalen Milroe's legs. I think he's going to be too much to deal with, and I think this LSU defense, while I think it's improving, I don't think it's all the way there where it needs to be, and although they're getting this one at home, I'm going to go with Alabama here. I think it's going to be a little bit of a battle, but I'll go with the Crimson Tide, have them keep their hopes alive for a CFP, and possibly be on their way to a CFP at the end of the year. But definitely going to be a fun battle, and cannot wait for that matchup to go. I'm going to pick Alabama, but frankly, kind of a coin flip game. Going to go back and forth, and going to be one of the best games probably of the year. So we'll break it all down, obviously, on Monday when we get back together. But let's get into some Week 11 picks right after this break. We'll get into a couple of kind of upset alerts. Like, we got Miami heading up to Atlanta to play Georgia Tech. We have Michigan heading down to Bloomington to face off against Indiana. Two undefeated teams that could be in a little bit of trouble this week. We'll break it down right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the huge game this upcoming weekend, Alabama at LSU, one that is an outright elimination game. Whoever loses it is going to be out of the CFP race. Whoever wins it is firmly in it, and frankly, probably would like them to get there. So, a huge game. I am picking Alabama, but I think it's going to be a little bit back and forth and kind of a coin flip game. But let's get into these couple of upset alerts that I have for you guys, and I think they're just games that are worth talking about. I think they're two games that maybe are a little bit more under the radar for you, maybe not quite as exciting, but are going to have a lot to do with the CFP race and could kind of throw a little bit of a wrench into the works for some of these teams. And we'll start with that Miami game in Atlanta, Georgia against Georgia Tech. And I think it's one of those games where Miami's has shown, I suppose, that they are going to make a couple of mistakes per game. Now, a lot of the times it has not been a problem. Obviously, they've been able to handle business all the way through, and I think this is one of those games where if you were to make those mistakes, if you were to hand them some of the opportunities that you handed some other teams, they can take advantage of them a little bit better. And on top of that, they can run the ball to a degree that could kind of give your defense just a little bit of pause when you're playing this team and could kind of grind this game out and make things just a little bit precarious for Miami. So I think it's going to be a battle back and forth, and I think the one thing to watch in this game is the Georgia Tech quarterback situation is still very much up in the air. It sounds like Haynes King is day-to-day. They're hopeful that he's going to go. I would expect him to be out there, but it's still very much up in the air. It could be Aaron Philo, the freshman. It could be Zach Pyron. All those guys have the capability technically to win this game. I'd be a little bit surprised. So it probably comes down to, is Haynes King going? Is he not? I would expect him to go, but again, all kind of shots in the dark and definitely something that we probably won't know until they take the field, because Brent Key is not someone that will necessarily share that with an opposing coach. But I think for Miami on the other side, you're looking for a clean football game. You're looking for what you got kind of against Florida State. It's going to be a little bit harder in this one, no doubt about that, but I do think you want to get that run game established. You want to use the play action. Oh, excuse me. Got a little bit of sneeze brewing, but you want to make sure you get that run game established, use the play action, hit those big plays over the middle, because you should be able to have those big play potential. The question is, can you get that run game going to open up the back end to the degree that you really need it to? And then, since Brent Key has been with the Yellow Jackets, he's been very, very good at getting his guys up for games like this, letting them know that they absolutely can win this game. So maybe it's a little bit of a battle for Miami to deal with, and maybe they get a little bit more battle tested than they already are in this season. But some players to watch, I think Eric Singleton's a fascinating player for Georgia Tech, and one of the guys that is just a little bit underrated in my mind in the world of college football. He is so dangerous down the field. He can make so many plays, whether it's on screens or drags or deep crosses or just outright goes. He can make some problems for you on defense, and I think when you look at this Miami back end, they've started to play better football. They've started to play a little bit more together. There's still some openings to be had, and especially if it's Haynes King out there, this is probably going to be the guy that finds those openings and really makes you pay for them. And then I got Kyle Efford. I think there's a huge player in this game, the linebacker for Georgia Tech, the kind of signal caller in that defense. And I think when you're talking about this Miami offense, there's so many things to worry about. There's so many things to deal with, and there's so many problems that you're going to have to answer. Thing is, if you can stop that run, if you can keep everything pinned in and make sure that when Cam Ward gets out of the pocket, when Cam Ward starts to create with his legs and creates those crazy plays, if you can run him down and force him to release that ball just a second early, he is prone to make a couple of mistakes. We saw it even last week with Duke. They were able to get home on that one crazy play. He threw it across his body, and they got a pick. And it's one of those plays where it could have changed that game if Duke was able to fully take advantage of that. So I think someone like Kyle Efford just standing in the middle of the field, stopping the run game, and then chasing down Cam Ward when he starts to create is really going to be the most important part of this entire game, probably for Georgia Tech. And then Elijah Arroyo, I think, is a fascinating player going into this game. He's gone just a tiny bit quiet over the last little bit. Now, everything has been more than fine with that Miami offense, but I think when you look down the stretch of this season, there's going to be people that are worried about Xavier Restrepo. There's going to be people that are thinking about Jacoby George and Isaiah Horton and all of those guys on the outside. I think this is the guy that kind of opens up that offense against those elite teams. Now, obviously, Georgia Tech is not necessarily the elite team that you want to play in the future. They are a team that can give you a little bit of trouble, and it's a team that, hypothetically, you should be able to maybe work out some kinks against, I suppose. So I think this getting this tight end going, especially heading down the home stretch of the season, is going to be huge for this offense to just not get bogged down in certain moments of the game, especially against the elite opponents that are probably on the horizon for Miami. And then we got Mychal Powell. I think this is a huge player, a huge transfer that they got over from Washington this past year. And we talked about the back end not necessarily being all the way there. They're still a very solid unit. I think they need a little bit more work, but at the end of the day, this is the guy that kind of keeps them all in order. It keeps them all kind of in the place that they need to be. And the real way that Georgia Tech's going to be able to find openings is if this Miami backend has miscommunications, if they have mistakes, if they have issues like they've had in the past and they had against Duke even last week. It's going to be interesting to see how they kind of keep into shape. And I think Mychal Powell is the guy that is just kind of the communicator, the leader of that back end, and whoever can kind of get all of that under control, then Miami can really turn a corner. But that's a big-time question in this game, and if they can stop this Georgia Tech offense, then it's going to have a lot to do with this back end. Some keys to the game, I think the run game getting going is going to be huge. Miami is 10th in run defense in the country. Georgia Tech is 34th. They've been both very, very solid. The Georgia Tech run game they rely on that a little bit more aggressively over at Georgia Tech than they do at Miami. So the question is, if Miami is able to stop them, does Georgia Tech have anything in this game? And then if Georgia Tech's able to stop them, are there still openings to be had on the back end? And that's kind of the uphill battle that Georgia Tech faces, where you can take away one part of this Miami offense and they can still hurt you on the other side. So it's going to be interesting to watch them kind of battle back and forth. And if this Georgia Tech run game can get going, then maybe this Miami offense struggles just a little bit more. And then you got to eliminate big plays. There's so many explosive chances in this game. There's going to be chances on both sides to make some big plays, and particularly Miami, obviously, one of the most explosive offenses in the country. So can Georgia Tech keep everything in front of them? Can they tackle really well? And then on the other side, can Miami avoid those huge plays that could totally change this game in a second? And then you got Cam Ward's decision making. This one's going to be something to watch really for the rest of the season. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He has given the ball away to some inferior teams and kept them in games. And it's not something that you're going to be able to do as you head down the stretch of the season, even against a team like Syracuse, maybe at the end of the year, or SMU possibly in the ACC title game. He's going to have to figure that out and at least reel it in a little bit. He only had one pick last week, so not necessarily terrible. And you can definitely live with that, especially when he's throwing 5 touchdowns a game. But definitely going to be something to watch and could be the thing that does them in or the thing that gives them the win here. And I think it's going to give them the win. I think the one gets a little bit ugly halfway through. I think this is one that Georgia Tech's able to grind out just a tiny bit. Whether or not Haynes King goes could be the difference in this one way or the other. But I think Miami's able to get the win. I think they continue on. I think this one maybe won't make you feel a ton better if you're a Hurricanes fan as you head into the home stretch of the season. But you'll get the win. You'll continue on your way. And then you got a huge one against Syracuse at the end of the year. But Moving forward to that Michigan-Indiana game, this one might be a little bit more straightforward. That's my thought, at least initially. That was my thought. But at the end of the day, you look at this Indiana team, this one's a little bit more about the psychology of this team, and really just kind of the rest of the year is about what this team's mentality is, where they are in terms of mental headspace, because Indiana, if you take out the COVID year, which may be a little bit unfair, but I don't think COVID was a very weird year, just in general. So you take out that year. Indiana has not beaten Michigan since 1987. Very serious. 1987 is the last time that they were able to beat Michigan in a totally normal year. The series overall is 62-10 all time. Michigan has won 3 straight between the two. It is going to be a little bit different for Indiana walking into this game as a 2-touchdown favorite. It is going to be a little bit different for these fans walking into this game expecting a win instead of just hoping for one. It is going to be a little bit different, kind of just the rest of the season, dealing with all the expectations of Indiana football right now. Are they going to be okay looking across the way and seeing Michigan and seeing that helmet, seeing those colors, and knowing we usually don't beat this team? Now, there's 2 very different teams. Not necessarily saying that that's totally going to change the way Indiana players are thinking. It is going to change this game just a little bit. And if Michigan were to get up by 10, 14 early in this game, does the crowd have that kind of creep in the back of their head and say, maybe we just can't beat this team? Maybe we just don't have it to beat Michigan, and then maybe this place gets a little bit quiet, or at least more quiet than Indiana fans are hoping for right about now. But for that to happen, it's got to be Colston Loveland. It's got to be that huge tight end that totally changes games and is one of the most dynamic playmakers on that team. Probably the most dynamic playmaker on that team, frankly. And he's one of those guys that you have a pass game that is taking care of the ball. You have a pass game that is at least doing the things that early on in the season they were not able to. You're probably going to have to get a little bit more. As sad as that sounds for Michigan fans, you're probably going to have to get a little bit more from that pass game. And frankly, it's probably just going to have to be Colston Loveland. So he's one of those players that can take over a game, and in this one, he's probably going to have to if Michigan's going to want to win. And then Kenneth Grant, I think, is huge in this game because you have a Michigan D-line that is still very good, is still very talented, and if they can slow down that run game for Indiana, maybe those windows become a little bit tighter for Curtis Rourke. Maybe a couple of mistakes come into play, and then things really start rolling downhill for Indiana in this game. So Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, it's going to be a lot to handle, and definitely something that could totally change this game. And then you got Miles Price, the wide receiver for Indiana. Indiana's been really good about spreading the ball out, about playing with a lot of guys, including obviously Elijah Surratt, including a lot of these Omar Cooper, really talented players. I think Miles Price is a really important player down the stretch of this season. I think when you talk about the elite defenses they're about to play, they can handle 2 wide receivers. They can handle a couple of running backs. They can handle a lot of the things, at least personnel-wise, that Indiana has to throw at them. If you can add a couple more guys into the real, down-to-down kind of play-to-play offense of your team, it's going to be a whole lot to deal with. And it's not just going to be you have an explosive offense because you find these guys over and over. You're going to find everyone, and it's going to be a nightmare for any defense to deal with because you can have the perfect defense call, but Miles Price is going to find a way to get open, and then you have to deal with 4 different guys on the offensive side of the ball instead of just those top 2 guys. Now, Miles Price has done a great job thus far, but probably going to have to be a little bit better down the stretch of this season. And then you got Michael Kamara, the linebacker, edge rusher kind of for Indiana, a very, very important player and one of those guys that can just totally take over this game. If the Michigan run game is not necessarily perfect, if they're able to kind of pin their ears back and get after the quarterback, this is going to be a guy that's going to make some waves. I believe he has 9.5 sacks on the year, so it's going to be a nightmare for Michigan to deal with. And if he gets home a couple of times, then it could just be a wrap for Michigan. Some keys to the game, we talked about it briefly. The Indiana O-line against the Michigan D-line is going to be massive. The Michigan defense is not necessarily elite. The D-line is still one of the very best in the country, one of the very best in the conference. And it's going to be one of those things where if Indiana can't get the run game going, is it one of those things that totally just bogs down this offense in a way that we haven't seen? Michigan's probably the best defense they've faced thus far, and it's going to be a little bit of a battle. And then Michigan's got to limit mistakes. It's been really good, really, since Davis Warren has taken back over. They haven't turned the ball over once. So it's going to be something that if they can continue that, if they can grind out possession to make things a little bit tough and not give Indiana that extra possession, I think they have a little bit more opening in this game, but that takes no mistakes from Davis Warren and this offense in general. And then we talked about it. Indiana's mentality is massive. This is totally uncharted territory for Indiana, for a lot of these players, for Curt Cignetti in a lot of different ways. As he walks into Michigan and Ohio State, he hasn't necessarily been in this point as a head coach. Plenty capable to handle it, but definitely something to watch and definitely something that could kind of hurt them in this game and possibly that game next week against Ohio State. But I don't think it's going to be too bad. I think Michigan's offense is very, very capable of getting something going. I don't think they're going to be able to get enough going. I think Indiana is able to win this one 31-17. I think it's a little bit of a back and forth affair, maybe a little bit gross towards the end of this one, but Indiana scores a late touchdown, is able to win it pretty comfortably and continue moving on with that undefeated season, go into a bye week, and then it's a huge one against Ohio State on the other side. But I think they're able to escape those upset alerts. I wouldn't necessarily bet on them. It's going to be a little bit of a battle back and forth, and wouldn't be surprised at all if Michigan or Georgia Tech were able to win these games, but I am going to go with the favorites there. I am going to go with Miami and Indiana, and we'll see what happens. Maybe some chaos ensues, but let's take our second break here. When we come back, we got to talk about the top 10 teams in the country, break down what we need to see from them this upcoming weekend, including Carson Beck's just got to take better care of the ball, but we'll break it down right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some games that I think could get a little bit sketchy for those undefeated teams, Miami and Indiana, facing off against Georgia Tech and Michigan respectively. Going to be a little bit of a battle, but we'll see what happens there. Definitely some that we will break down as we get into the next week, but let's get into the top 10. As we head into week 11, what do we need to see from these top 10 teams as they head into the home stretch of their seasons? Definitely some things that are a little bit awry with these teams right now, some things that you just want to continue seeing from a couple of these teams, and we'll start with that number one team in the country, the Oregon Ducks, right about now, and they're facing off against Maryland this upcoming weekend. They're 25 point favorites, feel pretty good as they head into this one, and I think the biggest thing here is, we talked about it yesterday when we talked about this one in the upset alert, it's just about Oregon keeping their focus. They've been incredibly good. If you saw that video that they put out on their Twitter yesterday, incredible how good this team is at keeping their motivation, keeping their focus in these games, and giving them a motivation one way or the other to finish off these games. Now, it gets a little bit tougher every single week that you have that number one next to your name. It gets a little bit tougher to keep your focus. It gets a little bit tougher to make sure that you handle all of the business that you need to. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see what Oregon does the rest of the way. And more than anything, the last little bit has been about them playing clean football. It's not been about them doing anything overly special or putting up 50 points per game or doing anything crazy. It's just been about taking care of the ball, moving the ball, staying in front of the sticks, and then hitting those couple of special plays that they're more than capable of. So make this no different, really. I think that's the only thing. And then on the defensive side of the ball, a little bit more specific, would love to see them force some turnovers. I think this Maryland team is going to throw the ball. They're going to push the ball downfield. The question is, can you get a couple of turnovers? That's the one category, really, that they haven't necessarily been elite in this year. It could be the thing that kind of takes them over the top and makes them not only really hard to beat, but maybe downright impossible to beat. And then we got Ohio State. They're facing off against Purdue this upcoming weekend, coming off that huge win against Penn State. And it's one of those where it's kind of a sleepy noon game against a team that you really shouldn't have to worry about. the goal is to make this no bigger than it should be. The goal is to make that line look totally normal, to make it look totally right at the end of the day, and not let this be kind of a Nebraska game where you come in feeling really good about yourself and you walk out just wondering what happened and feeling like you didn't play nearly your best football. And the other thing is something we talked about when we broke down that Penn State game. Give me the physicality level that you brought in the last 5 minutes of that game. Give me that for the entirety of this game. I would love to see a game where Will Howard has 90 yards passing, but they have 400 yards on the ground, and they're able to just tear them to pieces, run the ball every single down, and just kind of handle business the rest of the way. So it's one of those games where you really should be able to kind of play around with some things. You really should be able to work on some things, and I think if you can get that run game really rolling, you can get that offensive line. The other minor part is just that offensive line cohesiveness, making sure they're all playing together, make sure they're a unit of 5, not just 5 individual guys out there, getting over 200 yards rushing, getting over 300 yards rushing, really imposing your will, I think is probably the thing that they want to do in this game. And then just get out with no injuries. That's obviously the big time thing when you have a game that has a line like this one. It's about getting out with no injuries and finding your way to the next week feeling good about where you are. And then we got this Georgia game against Ole Miss this upcoming weekend, and it's all about that guy in the picture. There's no doubt about that. It is about just no turnovers, playing clean football, making sure you take care of the ball, taking what the defense gives you, not doing anything too aggressive, and I think it's all there. I think this Georgia offense isn't necessarily too far away. I don't think they're missing, massive holes. I don't think they're necessarily missing personnel, although people would tell you, this pass-catching group is not elite by any means, and they're probably right. It's plenty good enough. They have the talent to definitely be a very potent offense, and I think it's just one of those things where Carson Beck needs to take a step back, say, let's just make the plays in front of us. Let's just make that 5-yard check down. Let's hit the tight end on the flat, whatever that is. Just make things a little bit easier for your team and keep the ball moving, because this Ole Miss team is very dangerous. If you can keep that defense on the field, you're going to find openings, and you're going to be able to get this offense possibly lacking just a little bit throughout the day. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I think it's about doing what you did against Texas. Pin your ears back and go into attack mode. This offensive line for Ole Miss is very solid, not necessarily elite by any means, and it definitely one where if you can get after them, if you can make sure that Jackson Dart is not comfortable in this game, especially with essentially no run game to speak of for Ole Miss, you're going to be very, very successful. You have an athletic quarterback to deal with that is a little bit more athletic than that guy over in Austin, but at the end of the day, it's definitely one where you should be able to take advantage, and if you can, then maybe you walk out of there with a 8-sack, 10 tackle for loss type performance from this defense. Moving on to Texas, it's all about that quarterback again, really, more than anything else, and it's really about that offensive line in a lot of different ways, but with that, obviously, comes a lot of success for the quarterback. So the offensive line needs to go to work. They need to be a lot more dominant in the run game than they have been this year. They need to be a lot better in the pass game than they have been really the last 2 weeks against Georgia and Vanderbilt. So it's going to be a battle back and forth, and it's going to be a team that you're going to have to really hit a couple of big plays in this game more than anything else. I think Florida's a team, especially without DJ Lagway, if you're not able to fully handle your business, if you're not able to win this game by 14, 17 points, we're probably looking at being a little bit nervous about where Texas is going forward. Now, I do think it's one of those games where, regardless of who the quarterback is, it's not going to be the ideal situation. It's either not going to be 100% DJ Lagway, or it's going to be Aiden Warner, and you should be able to go hunting if you're Texas. You should be able to really get after the quarterback and make a couple of big-time plays. It'll be interesting to see the approach, and it'll be interesting to see how they all defend this. But more than anything else, hit a couple of big plays with Quinn Ewers, get that pass game a little bit more explosive than it has been the last couple of weeks, and that comes down to the offensive line more than anything else. Penn State has a really, really interesting game this upcoming week. We talked about it on the upset meter, where I think Washington's just a dangerous team. I think there's someone that could come in there and just outright ruin the season for Penn State this upcoming weekend. But more than anything, this is about picking yourself up. This is about making sure that you have the mental acuity, you have the mental toughness to get back up, be able to handle business the rest of the way, and find your way into the playoff. That's the ultimate goal here, and then you got to win a game. But you'll get to that, obviously. You have to be able to handle business this week and then the rest of the way, and this is probably going to be the toughest game that they face the rest of the way, if I had had to imagine. But the other part of this is it's a whiteout. Use the energy, use all of it, take a couple of shots downfield, be aggressive, do all of the stuff that has been missing and really was missing last week more than anything else. You're going to have to be able to push the ball downfield if you want to beat the elite teams in this country. Utilize this game. Utilize the energy that you're going to have and the aggression that your defense is going to be playing with, and take a couple of shots offensively. Take a couple of shots, and then you're going to get this run game going. That's the ultimate goal here, where you have the run game going, and then you can take those shots downfield. I think it's one of those games where it could be a little bit of a dogfight. If Penn State's able to make it even over that number of 13 that they're favored by right now, you got to feel really good about Penn State going forward, but it's really about just flushing out that Ohio State loss and doing kind of just all the things that they didn't do in that game more than anything else. Mississippi State-Tennessee is going to be a fascinating game. It's a Tennessee team that I've talked about a lot, and I think they're very, very close to being the team that they were early in the season and what they can be the rest of the way, but they're 1% away. They keep missing those deep balls downfield. They keep overthrowing them, underthrowing them, maybe dropping them for the receiver side. There's a lot of different things that are just missing by this much, missing by mere inches. But at the end of the day, if Tennessee can push the ball downfield in a game where you have the opening, you're not necessarily going to be in a ton of danger throughout this game, especially with how good your defense is. Take the shots downfield. You can afford a couple of mistakes in this one, and Nico just has to hit a couple of deep balls down the stretch of this season, especially next week. Use this one as kind of a primer, I suppose, for that Georgia game. Use it as a way to kind of get everything in place, and then you can move forward, and then you can feel like you're confident in this offense as you head down the stretch of the season. But it's going to be really hard to if you can't hit those deep balls. Use this one as kind of a buffer, I suppose, as you get into that Georgia game and utilize some of the things that you just haven't been able to early on in the season. And then I think the other part is just kind of take care of business, make this one not look weird, make this one not look ugly, make sure that people know that you're not looking ahead to that Georgia game like you were in that Arkansas game earlier in the season. Just be able to handle business, not overthink it, not overdo anything, and obviously take the shots where you have them, but not necessarily overdo anything in this game. Then we got the Holy War. It's going to be an incredible game between BYU and Utah, and BYU only being a 4-point favorite here, just a little bit sketchy. Definitely one that brings your eye to it a little bit more. And I think the biggest thing for me is for BYU is win the turnover margin. It's going to be a very, very good defense on the other side, one that has been incredibly good even after Cam Rising went out, and it's going to be a battle back and forth. And I think it's one of those games where if BYU is able to just do the things they've been doing all year, if they're able to win the turnover battle, if they're able to win situational football, they'll be more than fine. That being said, probably going to be the toughest team they've faced thus far in doing that. It's probably going to be the toughest team to get a couple of turnovers from, and it's probably going to be the toughest team to not, have a couple of turnovers against. So it's going to be a battle back and forth. And then for the BYU defense, I think it's just being about attacking. This Utah offense has not been good really since Cam Rising left, and regardless of who's at quarterback for them, just go to work in this one and not necessarily overthink it by any means. And then we got Notre Dame, Florida State, a game that is going to be a little bit disappointing. It probably should be the marquee game of the week, or at least one of them, and it's being a little bit left behind, which absolutely stinks, but that team down there in Tallahassee has not necessarily been playing great football. So for Notre Dame, it's about, making it look like they haven't been playing great football, making it look as, a lot of these Florida State games have looked this year, and really just taking care of business. But more specifically, find that pass game just a little bit more. Continue to, get after that. Continue to push the ball downfield a little bit more aggressively. And really, I'd love for them to find a wide receiver one. Find the guy that you can go to time and again, feel confident in, because down the stretch of the season, you're going to play some games that you're going to be required to find that one guy that you can go to time and again, and it's going to be important to find it in games like this. So definitely something to watch. And then for the defense, if you give up, I don't know what the number is, but let's say 20 points. Let's say 14 points, really, against this Florida State offense. you got some problems. So definitely be a little bit suffocating, really go to work and just take advantage of this moment. It was a game that you thought it was going to be a battle back and forth. You've been given a little bit of a layup. Take the layup and then keep moving to the next week. So it's going to be an incredible week just in the top 10 because you feel like you have a couple of upsets somewhere in there. But we'll obviously break it down throughout the rest of the week, and we'll see what happens as we go into this weekend. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we got to get into the little bit of a whip around. All of the different games that we haven't had a chance to get to thus far, we'll break them down right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the top 10 and what they need to see, what we need to see from them this upcoming weekend, and I think probably the biggest one of the bunch is just Carson Beck taking care of the ball. It's been an absolute problem for him thus far, and it's definitely something that will be a problem for him, and probably a bigger problem down the stretch if he can't get that under control. But let's get into the whip around of the Week 11 games because there's quite a few of them that could be a little bit sketchy and definitely some teams that just need to get back on the right track. And we'll start with that Iowa State team, number 17 in the country right about now, and they're -3 in this game going to Kansas. A very weird game where Kansas has really struggled pretty much all year. Only being favored by 3 here is a little bit interesting for Iowa State, but overall, I think this Kansas team is one of those teams that anything is possible, really, on any given Saturday. When you have a guy like Jalen Daniels, when you have an offense that has dudes, it's not necessarily been running the way that you want it to, but it has a run game that can cause you trouble. It has a team in general that can cause issues, and especially on the road, maybe they're the team that can totally bury Iowa State this season. And I think more than anything else, I would love to see them throw the ball in this game. Kansas gave up 350 yards to Josh Hoover a couple of weeks ago in TCU, and I think it's one of those games where you should be able to have some openings to take advantage of. Rocco Becht has gotten better and better throwing the ball downfield this year, and I think he's going to be able to do it in this game. I think Iowa State wins here. I think they cover here. I think they get everything back on track and pretty much just continue moving on their way towards a possible Big 12 title. And then you got Clemson, Virginia Tech. This is a very, very interesting game going on in Blacksburg, and definitely one where Clemson's just kind of in a bad spot. They got to win out. They probably need a little bit of outside luck to get into the ACC title and then into the CFP. It still could be a relatively successful season. You know, you go 10-2, you get to a relatively good bowl game, you win that one. You're probably feeling okay if you're Clemson, but at the end of the day, you lose this one, everything goes crazy. All the questions around Dabo Swinney become a lot louder. The confusion around that program going forward becomes a lot more intense. So definitely one where you really got to take care of business. And the good news is Kyron Drones and Bishal Tuten are still questionable for this one. So still very much up in the air. If they do not have them in this one, I think it's going to be remarkably tough to win it. I'll just be totally honest with you. It's going to be hard to win it regardless, but especially without those guys. I don't think you're going to be able to score with this offense, and I think your defense is going to be able to just outright go to work. Now, the Clemson offense does have to be a whole lot better than it was last week, so it could just be one of those things where they start facing some real teams that have some defensive players to work with that maybe they just don't have it offensively the way that we thought it would. So it's going to be a little bit of a gut check spot for both these teams. It's relatively likely, let's just say, that both these teams are out of the CFP race, out of the ACC race. Maybe the atmosphere just takes over. Now, I'm going to go with Virginia Tech in this one. As crazy as that sounds, I do think Virginia Tech's able to win this one, kind of battle back. I'm kind of on the fence about it, and I've gone back and forth just a little bit here, but I'll go with Virginia Tech for the time being. If there's any injury news, then I could very well switch that before we get to Saturday, frankly. But moving forward to the number 25 team in the country, Army is facing off against North Texas. We talked about this one in the Upset Alert segment, and we still don't know much about what's happening around Bryson Daly, and it's going to be a big-time question as they head into this one because it really just comes down to North Texas is likely going to be able to score in this game. One way or the other, they're probably going to be able to put up some points. does Army have the ability to score with them if they don't have Bryson Daly? I think they're going to be able to score points. Can they score the amount that they're going to need to in this one? And North Texas, they're number one in the country when it comes to pass yards per game. They're going to have to force the ball a little bit. They're going to have to play a couple of deep balls downfield and just put this Army offense back on the field. And especially if it's not Bryson Daly, let Kanye Udo and this run offense just have try to be able to win this game kind of by themselves. It's going to be a battle back and forth, and I think more than anything else, it's about Army's mental toughness. It's about them battling through this game, getting to that Notre Dame game, and feeling confident about them going forward. I think they're able to get this win. I think it could be a little bit ugly on the way there, but I think they're able to get the win, stay undefeated, and head into that Notre Dame game with a real shot at a CFP berth. And then we got a game that is not between ranked teams, but definitely wanted to break this one down really quickly. South Carolina-Vanderbilt is the game that is another quote-unquote elimination game for the CFP. Both these teams are alive for the CFP. Not necessarily, it's going to be an uphill battle and going to be one where probably not likely necessarily, but definitely one where whoever wins this one is still alive. Whoever loses this one is fully out of the conversation and will not get back into it. The question is, the QBs are going to be asked to do a ton in this game. It needs both of these offenses. It's about the QB decision making. It's about the reads that they make. So the question is, who does it better? Is it going to be Diego Pavia? Took a little bit of a step back last week against Auburn. Is he able to get back on the right track? And then South Carolina, is Lenora Sellers fully ready to go against a defense that is probably going to be a little bit more prepared? Is probably going to be fully locked in on this run game? Are they going to be able to get the openings that they need? And I think it's one of those games that could be very fun, could go a little bit back and forth. I think could fit a lot of different molds, honestly. I think it could be an outright slog fest. I think it could be back and forth, kind of explosive. I'll go with the Gamecocks here. I think they have a couple more game changers on that defense in particular, and I think that's probably the difference in this game. I think it's a little bit of a slogfest, but at the end of the day, South Carolina makes that one or two plays on defense to get the win. Then we got this game, and that line is very, very interesting, and it's a big-time reason why Missouri should be nowhere near the top 25, because that line is not crazy. That line makes a lot of sense to me, to be totally honest, especially if you're not getting Brady Cook in this game, which it doesn't seem like you're getting. So Oklahoma goes on the road to Missouri, and they're 2.5-point favorites. That offense has kind of been getting going. It hasn't been perfect. It's probably not going to be perfect in this game. But at the end of the day, since Jackson Arnold has come back from being benched, he has been a lot more efficient. He has been a lot more capable. Against Maine last week, they scored 56 points, ran the ball for almost 400 yards. Obviously, they're not going to do that in this game. But if they're able to get the run game going even 20% of what they had in that game, even 40% of what they had in that game, it's going to be a problem for Missouri, and they absolutely could take their second loss in a row. But I think for Missouri, they need this one for any remote shot at the CFP. I've made it pretty clear that I don't think they're getting there almost regardless of what happens the rest of the way, but if they're not able to win this one, then this season turns from one where you have a lot of promise, you have a lot of things going into a little bit of a disappointment at the end of the year. So it's going to be a battle back and forth. I think Oklahoma wins. I think it's going to be a weird one. I think Oklahoma's kind of found something offensively, and I think with the injuries for Missouri, I'm not so sure that they haven't necessarily thrown in the towel just a little bit on this season. But moving forward to that Nevada-Boise State game, this is going to be a really interesting one on Saturday night, and it's really the Ashton Jeanty show. That's what we're all coming for. That's what we're all staying for with the Boise State team. This is a 3-7 team on the other side, giving up 150 yards on the ground per game. This is the moment where he puts up that big-time performance, slides his way back up to the top of the Heisman conversation, and really it might be his very last moment to do that, if I'm being totally honest. Could have already passed, but who knows? Maybe this one will get him back into the fight. And the big-time question is, how does Nevada defend this game? Because it was talked about in the Boise State San Diego State game, where it felt like they were just trying to stop Ashton Jeanty. They had no interest in really winning the game. They were trying to stop the guy at number 2, and it's going to be really interesting to see if Nevada follows that approach, or if they try to sit back a little bit, kind of pick their battles, and play a little bit more complete defense, because SDSU was never going to win that game. If they were playing defense that way, they were just content to stop Ashton Jeanty, it seems. But it's going to be a battle back and forth, and Nevada and Brendan Lewis, that is a player that can totally take over this game and totally change things. I think Boise State will be more than fine in this one. I think Jeanty will put on at least enough of a show to give us a little something at night, but at the end of the day, I think Boise State wins and continues on their way to a possible CFP berth. Then we got Virginia-Pitt. Pitt's kind of in the same situation as Clemson, and actually they face off next week. So definitely going to be a battle back and forth. And Virginia is looking to add a little bit of salt into the wound for Pitt this upcoming weekend. And the line would suggest that's very, very possible. Eli Holstein has 2 touchdowns and 3 picks over the last couple of weeks. He's got to get back on track. This offense has got to be explosive if they're going to make waves in this game. And Anthony Colandre is a very dangerous player. He's not necessarily the athlete that Kevin Jennings is, but he is someone that can extend plays. He is someone that can confuse your defense and definitely make some plays that are going to make life hard for you. So it's going to go a little bit back and forth. I think this is one of those games where Pitt's just going to have to really battle. They're going to have to be really, they're going to be tested. They're going to have to battle back and forth, and they've been able to do it throughout this year. Obviously, last week was a really, really tough blow, but if they're able to get back up, get this win, and continue on their way, there's still an opening to get to the CFP. I think they do get this win, set up a huge one against Clemson next week, but definitely a game where if they were to lose it, then this entire season goes up in flames very quickly for Panthers fans. And then you got Utah State, Washington State. This team is still alive. These Cougars and John Mateer are still alive in this race, and it's one of those games where you're going to have to put up a lot of points. You're going to have to make a real statement in this game, and really the rest of the way for Washington State, if I'm being totally honest. You're going to have to put up quite a few points. You're going to have to really win this game in a lot of style because you're going up against a 2-6 team. Now, they have won back-to-back games, so they're looking for back-to-back wins after a win over Wyoming last week. So this offense is still one that can get rolling downhill for Utah State. They've scored 30 points in all but 3 games this year. They have the ability to score with you, but this is one where if Washington State is not flexing its muscles, if they're not winning by 21 points, if they're not, really making a point in this one, it's going to be really, really tough. I'm going to take Washington State, no doubt about it, but it's definitely one where you probably want to see Washington State cover that spread if you're a Wazoo fan and you want any shot at the CFP, honestly, the rest of the way. So it's going to be an awesome week. There's so many games that are a little bit more under the radar, a little bit maybe quote-unquote less important as we get into the home stretch of the season, but still very, very fun to watch. And still going to be games that you're going to be very happy that you tuned into, no doubt about that. But let's take our last break here. And when we come back, we just got some questions. As we head into this upcoming weekend, we got some questions including, will we get a couple more answers this weekend, or will it lead to a ton more questions and chaos? We'll break it all down right after this. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down all the other games that we just didn't have a chance to get to throughout the week, at least break down fully, but definitely some games that you're going to want to be on the lookout for throughout this weekend. But let's get into some Week 11 questions because I got quite a few of them, and we'll jump into this real quickly because I want to start with, are we going to need a couple more answers this week, or are we going to have way more questions as we walk out of this one? Because I think it's one of those weeks where we're going to get some answers, no doubt about that. We're going to get some where there is no question we have an answer one way or the other. Colorado or Texas Tech is going to be knocked out of the Big 12 championship of the CFP race, no doubt. Alabama or LSU is going to be knocked out of the CFP race, is going to be knocked out of the SEC race, no doubt about that. So we will get a couple of answers, no doubt, but we have a couple of places where we could get a little bit confusing. If Georgia's able to win, we'll get another answer. Ole Miss will be knocked out. Clemson could fall and be knocked out. Missouri could fall and be fully knocked out of the equation. What if Ole Miss wins? What if Missouri wins? What if Pitt wins? What if Clemson wins? And we're sitting here at the end of the week still with roughly the same amount of teams that can find their way in. Other than the games that are just outright going to give us answers, we have a ton of other games that could just throw a little bit of a wrench into the work. And I think it's one of these games right here where if you have Virginia win, that ACC clears up a ton more. If you have both Virginia teams win, Virginia and Virginia Tech, it's pretty much SMU and Miami. You pretty much know that the rest of the way, and you can continue forward with that in mind. If both those teams win, then you have a huge one against them upcoming next week, and maybe that's the elimination game at the end of the day. And then we got to talk about the under-the-radar games of the week, and it's a really fun week. There's a number of games that, behind those two huge games in the SEC, we have plenty of other games that are going to be really fun, and I think UCF at Arizona State is a really awesome one. It's one where you have two teams that are kind of finding their groove. Arizona State's been relatively good all year, but UCF being able to move to Dylan Rizek at quarterback has been really, really good for them, and I think it's one of those things that could be one of those games that gets up into the 40s, goes to double overtime, is absolutely crazy back and forth, and it's going to be a really, really fun one, no doubt about that. And then you got UNLV Hawaii. This is a very interesting one because whenever UNLV is on the field, frankly, that offense is worth watching, just in general, the rest of the way. But Hawaii has won 2 straight. They're a little bit of that team that's kind of been able to cause some problems for teams offensively, and Braden Schrager has really gotten that run game going. Maybe they're a team that can totally throw a wrench into the Mountain West and really kind of ruin UNLV's season in a lot of different ways. And then UCLA Hawaii, UCLA Hawaii, Iowa UCLA. Going to be a really interesting game over there in LA this upcoming weekend. UCLA has kind of been on a roll. They've won 2 straight at this point. They beat Nebraska last weekend. The line is only 5.5 in favor of Iowa. So maybe they can get into this one as well. It's going to be a very interesting game, and one where you could have UCLA continue on a roll. You could have Iowa at least stay in the remote conversation for a CFP berth. They're probably not going to get one, let's be totally honest, but maybe there's a little bit of an outward path, and this would be the only way to do it, is probably going in and dominating this team, frankly. But moving forward to the teams that I think need to make a big-time statement, and I'll probably kind of move relatively beyond these top 2 games, at least for the first 2 here. I want to get to a couple other teams that I think are worth watching, and I think Texas is a team that I need to see more from. They've been a team that has left a lot on the table the last couple of weeks, has not necessarily been the dominant team that we have become accustomed to, at least early on in the season. This is a game where if you can get back on track, coming out of a bye, get that pass game going, especially downfield, a lot of people will be right back on the Longhorn hype train where a lot of people have jumped off thus far throughout the season. So it's going to be really interesting to watch in a game where they should be able to win. You probably want to flex your muscles just a little bit if you're Texas. And then Indiana. You have a game that we talked about it. It is a little bit confusing. It is a little bit it's a turning point, I suppose, for this program in a number of different ways, and I think everyone is still looking at Indiana out of the side of their eye, even if they won't admit that they are. They absolutely are. I can promise you that. They're still kind of waiting for that other shoe to drop. They're still kind of waiting for that one stumble to happen. If it was going to happen, at least before that Ohio State game, this would be the game for it to happen, and it's definitely one where if they can totally handle business, it won't be a big question. If they can make that statement that I'm talking about, it will not be a problem going forward. If they stumble just a little bit more, and if they win this game by 7 points, are we looking up at that Ohio State game worrying that they're going to get blown out and then be totally out of the CFP race? And then you got Ole Miss. They sit at 16th in the CFP rankings right now. This win, they'll probably slide right up into the field of 12 and be in a really good position to finish 10-2, sneak in as a 7, 8, 9 seed possibly, and then cause some issues. This is a very, very dangerous team that can play really good defense, can be explosive on offense, and if they can make a statement this upcoming weekend, getting a big-time win over Georgia, then you're probably looking up at this Ole Miss team as possibly being one of those kind of crashers of the party, I suppose, in the playoff race. And then we'll move down to the G5 ranks and get into a couple of big-time games on that one because you got some smaller TVs. Throw these on those and definitely enjoy them. But I think Georgia State at James Madison is going to be an interesting one because Georgia State is a little bit limping coming into this one. JMU seems to have kind of found their footing just a little bit after yet another stumble throughout this year. It's been kind of an up and down year for JMU overall, but I think this one could get a little bit weird. More than anything else, this is kind of just a gut feeling. I'll be totally honest with you guys. I think this one could get a little bit weird, and maybe the Panthers can cause some problems for JMU. Then I got App State at Coastal Carolina. This is a huge game, and the line is only App State -1, and it is tomorrow night, so it's going to be a huge, or I believe tonight, actually. Yeah, it is tonight, excuse me. But it's going to be a really, really fun one, and I think could give us plenty of points tonight. So definitely tune in, definitely worth your time, and one where maybe if App State can get it and a couple other things fall their way, the Sun Belt is quote-unquote still in reach. Probably not, but let's be totally honest, everything can happen in that G5 ranks. And then we got New Mexico against San Diego State this upcoming weekend. It's Devon Dampier. He is so much fun to watch every single time that he is on the field. He is worth watching. Number 4, New Mexico is just so much fun. And then on the other side, you probably have the better team in San Diego State, if I'm being totally honest. But absolutely love that the quarterback for New Mexico, and I think it's just one of those games that could get a little bit crazy, could go a little bit awry, and maybe you have a couple of points going both directions, have a little bit of a shootout, like a lot of New Mexico games, frankly, and I think it could get a lot of fun. But moving forward to that Heisman race, we have 4 candidates. At least in my mind, we have 4 true candidates down the stretch of the season with a couple of guys that could sneak in there at the 5 spot. But then, to me, Dillon Gabriel has probably the least advantageous situation in terms of making up a lot of ground, making waves this upcoming weekend. Ashton Jeanty does not. He has every ability to make a little bit of waves this upcoming weekend, and it's about the same thing that it's been about pretty much the entire year for him. Put up ridiculous numbers. Put up numbers that everyone turns your direction, notices immediately. Put up numbers that regardless of what Cam Ward or what Travis Hunter or what Dillon Gabriel does, you are the most impressive performance of the weekend. That is his goal in this week, especially against a team like Nevada. You should be able to extend plays. You should be able to make some plays, some of those explosive plays you did early in the season. He's going to have to in this game and definitely wants to make up some ground in that Heisman race. And then you got Cam Ward playing a team that he should outright be able to throw for pretty crazy amounts of yards against. Let's just be totally honest. He should be able to do a ton of really, really incredible things. For me, it's just about limiting the mistakes. I think there is a world where if this team goes 11-1, and the reason that they lost a game this weekend or maybe against Syracuse or against one of the other teams that they play is because of a couple of mistakes that he made. So it's about just avoiding that, making sure that you are not the guy that gives the mistake away to give Georgia Tech this game, and then obviously take the openings that you have because frankly you're going to have quite a few of them, and he's been able to take advantage of the rest of the whole season, so maybe he's able to do it this week. For me, this is the winner. For me, this is the guy that can make up the most ground, that can do the most this week in terms of the Heisman race. He has a huge game against Texas Tech, and you have a Colorado game that really, probably the biggest that Travis Hunter has played in his Colorado career this upcoming weekend. So maybe this is one of those games where he puts on a show, they become CFP contenders, and really everyone's just kind of chasing his coattails the rest of the way because he's going to be so hard to catch, especially if this team really turns into a playoff contender and really turns into a playoff team. They're already a contender. But then we got individual matchup of the week, and I'll start with that Georgia O-line against that Ole Miss D-line. Two of the best groups in the entire country at the positions, and especially getting Tate Ratledge back on that Georgia O-line. It is going to be a really, really fun matchup. Walter Nolan, you have Princely Uman-Mielen, you have Sunshine Pert, you have so many guys on that Ole Miss D-line, that J.J. Pegues, so many different guys that can cause some issues. It is going to be a battle back and forth and could just be the outright the decider in this game one way or the other. Whoever wins that battle, probably walking out of there with a win. And then Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan against Blake Baker is going to be fascinating to watch, particularly Blake Baker more than anything else, because he had a game last week or 2 weeks ago that just totally got away from him. He was not prepared for Marcel Reed to come in, and it showed. And he's going to have to be a lot more prepared this week because you're facing a better rusher than Marcel Reed is this upcoming weekend against Jalen Milroe. So it's going to be really interesting. And then Kalen DeBoer with 2 weeks to prepare for this defense. Maybe there's a couple openings. Maybe there's some special things in store for that offense. So probably a battle back and forth, but the LSU defense just needs to be up to the challenge in this one. And then we talked about it earlier, the Indiana O-line against the Michigan D-line I'm watching very closely. This could be the battle that totally decides this game and maybe decides the season for Indiana in a lot of different ways, because this is the most physical, the most athletic, the most rangy defensive line they've faced all year, and it's one of those things that maybe Indiana has been a really, really awesome offense because they've been taking advantage of some smaller defensive lines, and then you get up against this really forceful unit. You can't run the ball at all. You can't do the things that you want to do, and then this offense kind of stalls out just a little bit. So that's going to be a battle back and forth, and Indiana's just going to have to win that battle if they're going to want to win this one. So a lot of different things as we head into this weekend. There's so many different things that we'll break down even going into tomorrow that are going to define this weekend. We'll probably get into a couple of head coaching hot seats as we head into the home stretch of this week of this year tomorrow. So we'll break that down tomorrow, but definitely be on the lookout for that, and we'll hopefully be able to get a couple of wins on our best bets tomorrow as well. But we'll break it all down tomorrow, but that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people covering every sport you could possibly want. So anything in the world of sports you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.